As you, our fellow Instagram creators, look to take advantage of the return to glory of carousels, it's probably in your best interest to discover what works best for you and optimize to better your results. To help get you to that point, we want to share a few tips that helped us along the way. What strategies do you recommend for people, creators on Instagram, to utilize to improve their performance of their carousels?
So my first one is in general text, but I'm gonna get into a nitty gritty on text. Text is huge because a photo album could be interesting, maybe more for the people that are really connected to you. They're not gonna be that interesting to people on the explore page or people that to want to share this with their audience. But if you are transferring knowledge, text is really, really key. And then inside of text, the one I was going to say about a detail, is I've been sprinkling calls to action in the middle of my carousels, not just one big one at the end, especially when you're like giving education, right? So if you create this educational carousel, how I do this. And then I'm like, oh, I use this strategy here. And then sometimes that strategy has a call to action. And I could be like, hey, let's say I set up my calendar. And then in the bottom, I'm like, by the way, if you want my free calendar template, comment this keyword. And then my next tip is like, I meet with my team every month, whatever the other step is. Maybe that step doesn't have a call to action. Maybe it does. So I started kind of sprinkling that in the middle, which I think it's not something that you only do, because I'm really big about your calls to action being loud and clear, really in your face. You don't want to hide them in one page of a carousel. But whenever you are able to give them that next step for the people who want to go a step further, it has been working really well. I was actually surprised the first time I did this because I just did it for, I'm like, let me test it. And then the comments were like full of people asking for that link. And I'm like, okay, so they saw it, And then I was even going to show you guys that I did a carousel. I think it was last week. And I just did like a cover with the title. And then each page had the little things in the end. And then in the end, I decided to do something different. Here at the bottom, I did my like wrap up. And then in the bottom, I said, P.S. Don't skip the resources page. And then I did a resources page, which has 3 calls to action of 3 things. And that has 240 comments, which is really a lot. And 240 is 120 people asking for the link. And the other 120 is me answering, I got you. But that's a lot for just a random carousel for me, so the reason, and it was cool to see because the resource page, I put 3 different things and some were paid offers, some were freebies. And when I look into the comments, it was a really good mix of people asking for the 2 different ones. So I thought that was a cool thing that I'll definitely
That's a really great idea. I've heard people mention that in regards to Reels. They'll say, make sure you don't just leave the call to action at the end. Make sure you try to put it in the middle because you don't know if they're actually going to get to the end of the reel in a way. But you putting it in between, it's almost like, dare I say, an ad in a way. Like you're putting an ad in the middle of the content,
they're all
and
ads.
sometimes they may not even wait till the end of the carousel to act on it, which is really great. I really like that idea.
For sure. I know when I was doing a lot more carousels, I would always use that first slide as like the hook, but then on the second side, it was more like a connection question of, talking to them. And maybe it's like a post about how to create better carousels. And then on that second slide, it's, do you struggle with getting people to view your carousels or engage with your carousels, something about that. And then I'll have like an arrow that says, if so, save this to come back for later. Like it was a call to action, very subtle, and continue swiping. And then I continue to teach obviously throughout that carousel, but it was super powerful to get a lot of saves or comments or whatever that call to action was. So I love that you're doing that. And I think it's really cool that you're playing around with which slides you're doing it on. And it's also important to note, when she was sharing that tip, that it made sense with the piece of content. It wasn't just random, like save, share, all the things, shout it from the rooftops for me. It was all value to her audience, and it made sense with the actual, piece of text she was writing at that time. It wasn't random. So that's important.
Yeah. Good point. And
I love it.
That's a really great point.
Going to continue with this text theme, I guess, and make sure to mention the importance of playing around with what fonts you're using, but paying attention to if they're legible, if they're large enough. You don't want anything that's too fancy. You want it to be branded. So yes, there's lots of pretty fonts out there or cool, unique fonts that you could use, but make sure that if it was on the Explore page, it's big enough and people can see it and care to actually click on it, because it's not just the imagery. It has to do with the contrast of the colors, the weight of the font, and if people can actually see what it's about. Is this worth me taking time to go click on it? It's so
Why is it that so
important.
many people forget that what we put on these messages, on carousels and these posts have to be visible? Like sometimes we focus so much on how it looks.
Because we're not designers. Because we're not designers. I
Yeah,
mean, it's a good thing and a bad thing, right? Because it's like we are not designers in general. We have to understand at the end that it's like this is wonderful that we have those platforms
that's
that 10
true.
years ago were not available, so we couldn't design anything.
Right.
And now we have them, but then we have the problem with we have to learn those things that are not necessarily intuitive. And then sometimes also we have designers creating fonts for us and things that are like this beautiful, delicate script that does not
Yes.
translate to the phone screen. So
Yeah.
yes, I understand. It's like it's so basic, right? Like
Yeah, no, you're right though, and it has to translate to the phone screen. So there would be times, still today where I create something, even if I'm using a template that I've used prior or whatever, the amount of text I add will vary the size.
mhm.
And so if I put it, on my computer, it looks great. Then I download it to my phone. I'm like, I can't read this. I have to go back in and edit it. Or, it's just a small thing, but it does really matter.
Yeah, I always tell people when you're in Canva, just as you're designing on your computer, which you should, it's so much better. Go to that bottom, like there's the little zoom button. Just go to 30%. If you can read at 30%, you can read on
That,
your phone.
that's a hot tip.
Yes, yeah, for sure. I'll also say, if you'll see those posts, like I've done some where maybe it wasn't a carousel, but it was just a static image of an infographic. So maybe if your carousel slide has that, it's okay to have small text on it that is, maybe not as legible when you see it on the Explore page, as long as that hook, that big, strong point is large enough, because that can actually be beneficial. People will click on it because they want to see all of the different facts if it's done in a clean enough way for them to get all that information. But definitely okay to have smaller text. Just make sure that the hook is
Yeah,
big.
you definitely got to play around with the different sizes in regards to it. It increases the readability. I want to add a tip to share with you guys, and I think both of you kind of mentioned it to a certain degree, and I want to make sure I emphasize on it. Um, I think you should consider what you put on the second slide just as much as you do on the first slide. And I want to get behind the reason of that. And I think Manu kind of mentioned it prior, but I'm going to make sure I double back down on it so you guys understand. The way carousels work on Instagram, usually as somebody that's scrolling on the feed, you might come across a carousel. They might say something like, here are the 10 best ways to improve carousels, right? Well, you might not interact with it at that point. Maybe you were busy, you might have left Instagram, or you just continued scrolling for whatever reason. Perfectly fine. And you continue moving on. But if you join onto Instagram again, maybe later on that day, maybe the next day, you have an opportunity to come across the same carousel, but this time Instagram shows it to you from the second slide and not the first. Because Instagram figures maybe the first slide didn't connect with you enough. So we're going to show you the second slide. And maybe at that point, you would actually engage. So that's why I'm saying make sure you emphasize and you consider what you put on the second one just as much as what you put on the first, because you have two opportunities to connect with your audience. And if you're failing on both, I think that's more of a look at how you're putting together your carousels than saying or blaming Instagram for not showing my content to my audience, because they're passing it by, but you have at least two chances to really capture their attention. So make sure you're considering to do it in a really slick way. Maybe it's really bold and simple words on the first one. And maybe in the second one, I think it was you that said this, Megan, that you kind of change it around a little bit on the second slide to maybe entice them in a different way. It might be the same question, but you kind of maybe you came at it from a different point of view, but you have that opportunity. Make sure that you kind of like just kick off the conversation at that point, that you get them feeling like the conversation already started what did I miss, and let them continue moving through the carousel. So I'm going to go back to you, Manu, to share your next tip in regards to how to improve carousels.
Yes, and I'm gonna also touch on something that Meg already did touch on, which is like have it be legible if someone looks at it on the explore page. And I'll add to that also that maybe someone visited your profile and they see you kind of in that grid format, kind of like the explore page, and that's also a chance to incite them to click and engage with that. So to think through content wise, but also design wise to your carousel cover. So your carousel cover is the only one that is going to ever be seen in the little grid as a little image. So some of you may know that Instagram has changed the format of the grid right now. We also have this taller format, which honestly I like and it makes total sense to me because we're posting, I mean, we see everybody's feeds and they post a lot of reels and they're talking to the camera on the reels and then you see their grids and it's like this. Forehead to chin. And that's a reason why Instagram is like, okay, this
I
looks a lot
agree.
better. And it is better for everybody, you know. A lot of the content is full screen. So to crop it into a square, it's very little.
Yes, that is an excellent tip to really think about how people are viewing it, whether phone or desktop, because it is a very different experience on both. So great tip there. I'll say that an important thing to consider is your community, your audience, your viewers' time. So just because you're allowed to have X amount of slides doesn't mean you have to use them all, right? So you want to try to condense your message without taking away the power of it. You don't want to take away from it, but you want to get really good. It takes practice. Gosh, it takes me a lot. I love to talk, right? I could go on and on forever. So it takes me a lot to really condense my ideas and whatever I'm teaching, or if it's a story, into less time, less text, something that's going to help people get what they came for, stay on your post through the end, and feel like it was worth their time. You don't want to just drag them along. So making sure that even if you're allowed to have 20 slides, you're not using it just because you're allowed to have 20 slides. Make it as long as it has to be, but not longer.
And I think that feel free if you want to experiment and figure out what is the best amount of slides for you and your audience, what they might be a little bit more receptive to in regards to how many slides are possible or how many slides that they would prefer. Like maybe if you want to practice with your audience, how many, if you want to practice 21 times, go right ahead. I did it once and I literally put one word per slide. I forgot. It was pretty much stating Instagram, we do not need this many slides, but I put it one word per slide just to play around and have fun with it. But honestly, I still try to keep my carousels to 10 slides, maybe 12, 15, but I really try to minimize it. And I'll
Yeah.
get into a little bit of that as well in regards to a few of these other strategies. But I think that's really smart.
Also remember that part twos exist, you know, like sometimes when I have too much to do,
Yes.
I'll do part one, keep an eye out for part two. People really love that. They can keep an eye on your page, which is kind of nice too.
I'm gonna go into my next one. It's something that I've actually been practicing as well. I like to look at carousels as a brochure and a pamphlet. And what we do with brochures and pamphlets, we hand them off to people to take and to learn. And hopefully they come back, right? They come back and now that they learn a little bit of what I'm presenting, they want to contact me. So I do that on other platforms, particularly threads. Now, I don't post the carousel as my original thread. I, particularly for those that don't know, I specialize in many chat and DM automation. So I'm always in different conversations around those topics. And whenever I come across certain questions that I know I have a carousel already that answers it, I just simply reply, say, hey, I hope you don't mind, but I have the answer that you're looking for. And then I share with them the carousel. I love how carousels look on threads because it just stands out so much better. And I've been doing this for probably a few weeks now, and people have been really enjoying the fact that they get this answered. So I've been using it like a pamphlet. You know, when somebody asks me, so I have one of my carousels is ManyChat is a game changer, and a lot of people on Threads don't know what ManyChat is. So when I get that question, bam, there goes my carousel, and then they click onto it, and it leads them to Instagram, and then maybe I might have a follower, but my engagement and reach increases on that as well. So you could do that on other platforms. I think carousels might work really well on Pinterest. Now that I think about it, that might be another platform you might want to consider. But utilize it to attract people from other platforms as well, and you could also increase your engagement and reach that way. So that's the tip that we want to share that we all kind of agree on, and it's something that's, I guess you could say, is kind of new. One of the sort of new features that came out last year is audio. Adding audio to a carousel is definitely next level, because you add audio to carousel and now it takes that carousel and it puts it on the Reels tab. That significantly increases your reach, because now, where before carousels, I think for the most part, and feel free to disagree with me, ladies, but I feel like for the most part, carousels was mostly meant to reach your followers. I'm not saying it doesn't reach people that don't follow you. It definitely has the capability of doing that, but I feel like it's more of a nurturing type of content format, and most of the engagement that you will really get from it is from people that already follow you. Now, I've seen others really grow with carousels, but I feel like it's much harder to do than with Reels. Reels is really pushing for the non-follows.
Well, Reels have the audio page and
True.
has the Reels tab. And Carousels is not a part of it. But as far as not being a part of those, I still think that Carousels had the chance, if they're really good,
Yes.
it has to be a little harder than Reels for that to happen. But if it's really good, people would share it. And that's how you get a lot of like discoverability and new people, and maybe some from the Explore page. But you definitely didn't have the two, the
Yeah.
Reels tab, which people spend so much time on it.
Yeah.
And then
So in a way,
audio
Reels is
tabs.
designed really for you to get more people. But I'm not saying carousels does not do that as well. It's, as you're stating, it's much harder, but it's not impossible. And with this brand new feature of adding audio to a carousel, and now they're pushing it on the Rails feed, I think that's a great thing for people to consider. Now, I'm wondering if you had any tips, Manu, in regards to like the idea of using audio on carousels.
I think it's important to, just in case people are not completely clear on that, I think it's important to differentiate like adding videos inside your carousel that have the audio in it, maybe your voice or whatever, and adding a trending audio connected to Instagram to it. You are always able to add stuff with audio in it, like videos on your carousels. But now, starting, I think it was the end of last year, right? That Instagram announced now you can add trending audio to your carousel, or any audio to your carousel. And I think the big thing about that was that they are going to be put together with the Reels tab. To be honest, I have not seen a huge, it's really, sometimes Instagram is really hard to test. So I haven't seen like an effective difference from that. But honestly, like whatever those capabilities are, I think it's always good to try and test it, because we're not like, people are not like begging to see our content in any shape or form. A lot of content out there. But I have been adding audio, and what I usually do is I honestly don't. I go directly to my saved audio, and I put the last one in there. Like just I try not to put any audios that are going to take away from. If it's a lot of text in it, I try to put maybe something that are a little more instrumental, or even I scroll. Maybe there's a part of the song that is like the popular that everybody's using that it gets to that once you click. I usually will scroll down to all the beginning of the song, and then you get the little instrumental part a little bit, and then it's not like clashing with your words. So I guess that could be one tip, just not to, because we want to do things to get more exposure, but also you don't want to take it from the experience maybe of your biggest followers that would see it regardless.
I practice the same thing. Do you do the same thing as well, Megan, in regards to using instrumentals on carousels, or do you play mostly?
Do my best. There are some that like will slowly get a little bit of some words in there, or maybe it's just like a soft word. But
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't mind if it's like something that people are used to in a song. It's just not something that people want to pay attention to at the same time. You have to try to see, but sometimes it'll feel like too much. Then you
Definitely
probably can turn
agree.
it down.
We're gonna go to our last tip, and Manu, if you could please introduce our last tip, because it's definitely close and dear to you.
Sure. So one last tip I was gonna give you, because also carousels can take longer, so it's hard to say, hey, now you guys who are struggling to do one post, 3 posts per week with one image, now you have to do multiple images all the time. Like, I don't want people to feel that type of pressure. So I'm going to give like 2 hacks to make a regular post into a carousel in the same amount of time. And one would be if you're creating a little graphic and maybe it's like a little screenshot of your thread with a background, do 3 versions of the same thing with 3 different color backgrounds and just post it as a carousel. You have those chances to get, into more people's feeds without giving too much extra time creating. So that can be fun. Also, I have a feeling that people are more likely to share something that they like the color and it's cute and matches their brand. So you have more chances for people to share to stories. And then my other hack, in the same sense of like making a regular post turn into a carousel, especially if you're doing like a little campaign or you're pushing for a product or service, mix different posts into the carousel. Sometimes I do that. I go into Canva and I create, like, let's say I create a meme and a quote and a more straightforward, sales post and maybe like a little infographic that has a few bullet points or something. You can do all of those as a carousel. Team them up. I do this all the time. Sometimes also when I'm doing like a campaign, I'll have a little page that is just the call to action. So I'll do a different post and then add that call to action. On the next one, I'll do a different post and I'll add maybe that page that has all the things that are included and then end with the quote, So I kind of mix and match those things all the time and make them into carousels, without spending too much extra time creating like a long sequential carousel every
Got it.
time.
I think that's really smart. I'm sure it saves you a ton of time. I'm aware of a lot of people that like to start from scratch. And I feel like that's just doing yourself a disservice in regards to your time. You have to make the most out of your time, your energy. Sometimes you might not even, energy wise, you might not even be up to the idea of creating a carousel at the moment. But if you have a template or something to kind of start off, I think it just makes it so much easier in so many ways that um, it'll just put you ahead of the game in regards to moving forward and just getting straight to creating the content as possible, easy and as fast as possible to make the whole content creation process just simpler for you because it is work. But if you can make your work a little bit more satisfying, a little bit, quicker for you to complete, then it's less work and less tax, and you actually would possibly even enjoy it.
I'm going to be honest that I use them for like inspiration, but I don't necessarily like use the exact template. I usually will start with a template and then by the end it looks completely different, which is totally okay. I think people need to understand like it's great for you to, have something that is completely unique to you, or maybe it's a template that says 5 tips but you have 7. It's okay to add those extra pages, duplicating them. But I always suggest people, if they're feeling overwhelmed, to use templates, to try to start there, to get used to it, because that professional template is going to ensure that, the text is big enough, that the design is nice and pleasing to the eye, that, everything is placed right for the consumer to have a good experience when they're consuming that piece of content. So I think if you're not using one because you are creating from scratch, to at least start there to really get that inspiration to study them. And if you are short on time, it's a lifesaver for
Definitely,
sure.
definitely. So, you guys, I think we've knocked it out of the box in regards to all these different strategies and tips for you to go ahead and move forward with and start utilizing carousels more than you've been doing it before. Listen, I think it's a carousel renaissance going on right now. They are coming back bigger and better. Instagram is finally showing carousels the love that they deserve. And creators that are noticing that are taking advantage and they are benefiting from it now by increased engagement and increased reach. And that definitely helps out. Both of them helps out towards increasing your audience, growing your community. And I think Carousels is one of the keys to doing that. So using these strategies and tips, we hope that you guys take this to your advantage.